Shalom and good evening. This is TV7 Israel News broadcast to you from Jerusalem. And in today's top stories, Israel persists with mediation efforts to try and convince Russia and Ukraine to resolve the conflict diplomatically. The nuclear talks in Vienna have been suspended at a time when Israeli security officials are voicing concerns that international attention on Ukraine is distracting the international community from paying attention to Iran. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps claims responsibility for a ballistic missile attack directed toward the U.S. consulate in Iraq's northern Kurdistan region. Jerusalem proactively aspires to convince Moscow and Kiev to cease hostilities and resolve differences via diplomatic means. The walls of Jerusalem's Old City were illuminated last night with a display of the flags of both Russia and Ukraine. In between the flags, a Hebrew text read, "The Maker of Peace in the Heights," which is the beginning of a frequently recited prayer that continues by declaring God a peacemaker who will assert peace on all, including his nation Israel. Underneath the refer to proclamation, another Hebrew text read, "We are waiting for you," which is ostensibly in reference to tens of thousands of Ukrainians, including Jews and Gentiles alike, who are making their way to Israel to seek refuge. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett spoke to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky for more than an hour yesterday, during which the two leaders discussed ways of ending the Russia-Ukraine war and about Israel's efforts on that front. Subsequently, during a press conference, President Zelensky was asked about Israel's mediation efforts to broker a ceasefire.
Ми в цілому позитивно відносимось, я особисто позитивно відношусь до посередництва будь-кого, але я не називаю пана Беннета будь-ким, тому що вважаю, що він може зіграти важливу роль.
It is important to know that during a separate press briefing at the Ukraine embassy in Tel Aviv, Ambassador Yevgen Kolnichuk stressed that Israel was not the only mediator trying to broker a ceasefire between Kiev and Moscow. Therefore, the Ukrainian ambassador to Israel stressed that Jerusalem did not need to remain impartial for the purpose of sustaining a so-called honest broker status.
What we expect from Israel at the moment, the government to join the sanctions of their alliance, including, but not only, the US and the European Union.
It is important to explain that Israel has faced growing public criticism by Biden administration officials over Jerusalem's apparent hesitancy in joining international sanctions against Moscow. According to the Israeli Channel 12 News, Israel avoids joining Western sanctions against Russian oligarchs, which consequently drew a public rebuke by U.S. Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs Victoria Nuland, who urged Israel to join the international effort against Russia, stressing that it does not want to become the last haven for dirty money that is fueling Putin's wars. In response, Israeli Foreign Minister Yair Lapid, who is currently on the second leg of a two-day working visit to Romania and Slovakia, sought to clarify Jerusalem's position.
Israel will not be a route to bypass sanctions imposed on Russia by the United States and other Western countries. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Israel is coordinating the issue together with partners including the Bank of Israel, the Finance Ministry, the Economy Ministry, the Airports Authority, the Energy Ministry, and others.
Jerusalem's top diplomat, who concludes his trip to Slovakia this evening, went on to thank the Slovakian government for cooperating with Israel on matters of humanitarian relief for Ukraine.
Israel and Slovakia are cooperating in getting humanitarian aid into Ukrainian territory. So far, Israel has sent more than 100 tons of medical equipment, generators, and other goods into Ukraine. We thank the government of Slovakia for its cooperation.
The day prior, Foreign Minister Lapid visited Romania, which has also become instrumental in securing the safe evacuation of Jewish orphans, among others, from the war in Ukraine.
The Romanian government has been working closely with us and was extremely helpful in saving many lives. Jewish children from an orphanage in Odessa, children with cancer who have been sent to Israel for treatment, and thousands of refugees that have escaped through the Syrian crossing. Their lives have been saved by the cooperation between us, Minister. I thank you, my friend, and I thank the government of Romania for your cooperation and goodwill.
Minister Lapid went on to reiterate Israel's condemnation of the Russian invasion of Ukraine while underscoring Jerusalem's unrelenting efforts to help reach a peaceful solution to the conflict in full cooperation with the United States and European partners. Meanwhile, Israeli security officials are voicing concerns that international attention on Ukraine is distracting the international community from paying attention to Iran. At a time when the Islamic Republic sprints toward nuclear weapon capabilities, nuclear talks in Vienna were suspended last week for two apparent reasons, including Tehran's refusal to accept any scenario in which the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps are not removed from the U.S. list of designated foreign terror organizations, alongside Russia's demand to receive written guarantees that sanctions imposed against it over Ukraine will exclude any benefits that will emerge from a revived nuclear agreement with Iran. Nevertheless, regarding the Russian demand, the United States remains resolutely indifferent.
The new Russia-related sanctions are wholly and entirely unrelated to the JCPOA. They shouldn't have any impact on a potential implementation of the JCPOA. We've also similarly been clear that we have no intention of offering Russia anything new or specific as it relates to these sanctions, nor would that be required. There is nothing required to successfully reach an agreement on a mutual return to full implementation of the JCPOA.
Price went on to reassert, however, that the time for decision-making is now.
Now is the time for all parties to demonstrate that seriousness of purpose. We can and we should be able to reach a mutual understanding to return to full implementation of the JCPOA, but there is very little time remaining to do that. There will need to be decisions made in places like Tehran and Moscow, and if that political will is there, if that seriousness of purpose is there, we remain confident that we can achieve a mutual return to compliance in fairly short order.
Shortly after Washington's call on Tehran to indicate its so-called seriousness of purpose, the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps launched 12 ballistic missiles at the direction of the U.S. consulate in Iraq's northern Kurdistan region. While the consulate building was not directly targeted, civilian structures sustained heavy damage in its surrounding.
كهات موا هنا مزرعة كان دنجر رمبتشي قرا قورهات سارة كم راس قاعات زاو ما مكانها متقي تصاص ما وش مو ديارة كبيرة مكتيا وهم ديارة كبيرة مكتيا دوا ديسان دم هات مو دري قلتم با ما دم سارة بتسلا قورينا قلتم بحر بخوشم نما إيه دوا ثم برك ثم السرواتر عين دي صار ماشي جورة ترها عين وشي دي صار ماشي جورة ترها الدنيا صعوبة.
The RGC, which unabashedly claimed responsibility for the attack, insisted that the target struck was in fact an installation being utilized by the Israeli intelligence agency Mossad, while Iranian regime-controlled media outlets cited sources as saying that the attack was conducted in retaliation for an alleged Israeli drone strike on one of the RGC bases in Iran's Mahidasht region mid-last month.
جمهوری اسلامی ایران انتظارش از دولت مرکزی عراق این هستش که یک بار برای همیشه به این وضعیت پایان بده و اجازه نده که مرزهاش مورد سوء استفاده قرار بگیره. رژیم صهیونیستی هم متاسفانه بارها و بارها از داخل خاک عراق ناامنی ایجاد کرده. برخی تجمعات ضد انقلاب در اقلیم کردستان، گروه‌های تروریستی و گروهک‌های تروریستی در اون منطقه
Iraq's Kurdistan regional government, however, rejected the Iranian claims as sheer lies, stressing that the Iranian claims were being spouted only to hide the disgracefulness of such offenses. It further stressed that Iran has repeated these attacks many times, and the silence of the international community in the face of these cowardly attacks will pave the way for their continuation. Separately, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan released a statement in which he strongly condemned Iran's missile attack, which he noted targeted a civilian residence in Erbil, the Kurdistan region's capital city, without any justification. He went on to pledge U.S. support for the government of Iraq in holding Iran accountable, alongside support for U.S. partners throughout the Middle East in confronting similar threats from Iran. However, with the situation in Ukraine serving as an analogy, Israel is preparing itself by means of forced buildup to contend with Iran's aggressive expansionist efforts. Thank you for watching us. As part of TV7 Israel's daily prayer initiative, I would like to encourage you today to pray for Australia, including all those who are affected by a flood crisis in the continent, alongside unceasing prayer for the situation revolving Russia and Ukraine, prayers for our persecuted brothers and sisters worldwide, in addition to our ongoing prayers, of course, for the peace of Jerusalem and the salvation of Israel. I'm Jonathan Hassan, wishing you a Shavua Tov U'Mevorach, and we will see you again tomorrow at the same time.